Hey everyone, it's Josh. I wanted to put together a few clips of episodes at the end of 2024 that I thought were really interesting because they were connected and articulating an idea that I've been chewing on for a little bit, which is the concept of transforming our current organizations and how they're the management, how our current organizations are managed, and thinking about new models of this management. So one, I thought it was really interesting that we had three guests that spoke to this concept this year. But the reason why I think it's appropriate now is because I feel like there this is a moment, an opportunity for organizations to who are finally getting back on their feet and really thinking, okay, now we're sort of post-pandemic, we've kind of sorted through a lot of the kind of new changes. And what I'm concerned about is that a lot of organizations are going back to kind of a traditional command and control environment. And the reason why that's a problem is because of this other trend that I'm seeing where employees are being asked to do more and more and more work just because our world is speeding up. I feel like we're at the limit of our current structure. There's too much being asked of too few employees. The pace of release of new features and new products. And of course, I work a lot in tech, and so I'm biased towards seeing more of that. But I even think in other organization, it just feels like, oh man, I have to put in a couple hours over the weekend. I just can't catch up. There's just so much going on. Sure, there's a lot of software that's out there trying to like kind of nip and tuck at the edges. And the onus of kind of this pushing back against kind of the beyond the work week is on the employee. And so all this together is making me consider or think that there's got to be a better way. And so when I spoke to the three guests that I'm going to share with you now on this episode, uh, they have some insight and perspective around what it is that the problem that's occurring and how it might be solved. So the three guests include um, author and management guru Rod Collins. I spoke to him earlier this year about the release of his new book, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. I chose a clip where he describes kind of how he discovered the idea of networked organizations when he was running Blue Cross Blue Shield for the federal employees Blue Cross Blue Shield. He's also going to talk a little bit about. I asked him a little bit about the role individual contributors play in a networked organization. Then I spoke to Doug Kirkpatrick, who started Morningstar Tomato Production Company. He was one of the founders. I had him talk about kind of the story of how they moved into that direction, what he calls the self-managed organization, and how it runs. Morningstar is now the largest producer of tomato concentrate in the world. And so he talks a little bit about that, as well as he's also written a book called The No Limits Enterprise. And so I asked him to speak about self-managed companies. And then finally, Joost Schouten. He is a technology founder as well as someone who's been thinking about adaptive or self-organizing roles for a long time. And he's got some wisdom to share about kind of his product and what they're trying to do to change how organizations think about the traditional command and control. I'll wrap up this intro by saying it feels like there's just too much overhead. We're spending, as organizations get larger and more complex and speeds up, we're spending more and more time, and it makes sense, more and more time on this like um, the overhead of management. And that is an appropriate response if we're thinking about this traditional management structure. Is it time for more organizations to think about reinventing that? How do we actually use technology to take over some of that role, some of those tasks and roles of management or of organization in order to help employees not just spend less time in meetings and manage and being managed or managing others, but enable them to actually create more value by doing the things that they are best at, adjusting and editing their kind of specific roles and tasks in a way that actually will help organizations evolve faster, innovate better, which we've been talking about for 20 years in the business world. And it is a moment that I don't want to see go to waste. There's something happening. I feel we're about approaching a moment of crisis where employees are being asked to do so much more with less. It just feels unsustainable. So enjoy these clips from Rod, Doug, and Yost. I think they're really insightful conversations. And if you want to learn more, you should go back and listen to the full episodes. So let's get started. We'll hear from Rod Collins.
I've spent 33 years with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. And the story that we're about here begins probably about halfway through my career there. I had spent about 15 years as the general auditor, which, by the way, is one of the greatest jobs in the world. You look at what everybody else does and write recommendations on how they can improve. Well, one day, my boss came in and said, we're changing your role. And we had endured about 2 decades of low growth, low performance. And he wanted a turnaround. And he said, I want you to lead the operations. And so my first insight, as I thought about what needed to be done, because now I was going to be responsible for results rather than commenting on others, is the insight was we're leading a network, not a hierarchy. And maybe that's what's sustaining the low growth, low performance. Maybe what we have to do is learn how to lead a network. And the reason I say that is the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program is a business alliance of what were then 39 separate Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations. And most of our meetings rarely came to closure and agreement among these 39 different organizations. And our central office was in Washington. And so we would come up with directives and we'd spend a lot of time arguing over who's in charge. And I thought, well, what if we stop that? And so as I thought about it, I thought, there's really nothing out there about leading networks. I've got a master's in business administration, and what you learn there is how to lead, top-down hierarchies. Most management consultants that you bring in teach you how to benevolently lead hierarchies. What if we didn't have a hierarchy, but built a network? And so, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we talk, I recognize you needed to change three things. You needed to change the managers and what they do. You needed to change meetings and how we make decisions. And you needed to change the metrics that we were focused in on. And so within our division, we set things up so that decisions had to be made by teams rather than individual managers. And I was especially able to do this because when we put this model in place, we were able in 2 years to gain as much of the lost enrollment that we had suffered 20 years before that. In those 20 years, we had picked up 4 points. In 2 years, we picked up 4, but then we took off like a rocket ship. And I spent my last 5 years there actually as the program's chief executive. And so I was leading a business unit. And since I had the whole business unit, I could bring this self-managed model, a network model, into the organization to the best extent I could. I couldn't change the nature of titles, for example, but I could change the nature of how we made decisions and how we worked. And so in putting this in, no single individual could make a decision. So, for example, when I led the senior leadership team, I indicated to them, none of you can make unilateral decisions for your areas. Every decision you make has got to be run by the entire team because every decision you make affects everybody else. Another thing I did was, and this is changing the way we met, is most leadership teams go off site once a year to do a strategic session. We did a strategy session once every 2 weeks, and we went off site because in most organizations, and I think this is dangerous in rapidly changing times, nobody's minding the strategy. Nobody's thinking deeply. And we accomplished two things with these meetings, these offsite meetings once every 2 weeks. One, we did delve deeply into the strategy, discovered things we weren't even focused in on. We discovered needs to create new products that we had never had before. And the second thing that was accomplished is we really created a highly cohesive team, because when you spend that quality time together and thinking collectively about how we're going to build strategy, over time, the cohesiveness just inherently happens. And again, since no one could make unilateral decisions, these team members really had to know each other's strengths and weaknesses so that we could make the decisions best as a team. And finally, in terms of metrics, most organizations spend too much time focused on their financial measures. I'm not saying these aren't important because they let you know whether you're winning the game or not. But also, if the numbers are negative, it's too late. The game is over. What you need to be focusing on are the most important leading indicators, because those allow you to act. And so we spent some time. One of the things we did in our offsites is really deeply dig into what are the four most important leading indicators of the business. And the most important one was a number we had never measured before. And it turned out to be the most consequential number that let us know whether we were winning or whether we were losing. And then we broadcast the results of those all over our halls. So anybody walking off an elevator in our office building would know whether we were winning or losing, because these leading indicators were on the walls and we color coded them from blue, green, yellow, or red, blue being highest. If you're Blue Cross Blue Shield, of course, blue is the highest color, and red means we're in trouble. And you didn't need a boss to tell you whether we were winning or losing. Every single person in our office would know it. And by letting them see the leading indicators, if they gravitated from green to yellow or to red, people didn't sit back waiting to be told what to do. They immediately began working on what do we need to do to improve these numbers so that they get to the green or blue areas. And you find out people close to processes are capable of making very good decisions and oftentimes know what needs to be done more quickly than people supposedly at the top of organizations. So this gives you a sense of how we applied this network thinking inside a more traditional organization. Individual contributors, these are the brilliant people in organizations, many of whom aren't managers, and many of whom don't have a voice. And individual contributors are essential if you're going to manage in a rapidly changing world, and it is essential that they have the appropriate power. In a peer-to-peer network, in a self-managed structure, there are no powerless people. In a top-down hierarchy, roughly 2/3 to 70% of people are powerless. By the way, that corresponds with the number of people who are engaged in work. I think there might be a correlation there, okay? In the top-down hierarchy, power is a function of coercion. Do what you're told. We want uniformity of thought. We want compliance. That's what they all work towards. In the context of your current business model, fine. But what happens when that business model is gone? Why are so many companies dropping rapidly off the Fortune 500? They don't last as long anymore. People are saying at the end of 10 years, as much as 2/3 may be replaced. That's a shame. That shouldn't be happening. What that says is companies cannot evolve past their current product model. Now, let's get back to your concept of individual contributors. In a network, power is not a function of coercion or force. It's a function of energy, synergy. And in a network, any group of people can go off and say, we're going to create the future. We are going to create a product that may put our product out of business, the one we're in now. And that's not a bad thing, because the one you're in now is going to be put out of business. Why not you? Why somebody killing you?
Mm-hmm.
This is the difference between Blockbuster and Netflix. Netflix doesn't send DVDs to your home anymore. That was their first product model. They're now streaming and making movies. They are able to move from product model to product model because there are people inside Netflix who are free to develop new product concepts, even that may threaten the ones that they have now. And so in a network, individual contributors. So you might have a group of maybe 4 or 5 individual contributors, highly skilled people who can really see where things are going. If they can get together as a team and put together ideas, then they can bring them forward. And you can also set up processes within your organizations where different people with different ideas can present them to other teams who are not involved and see how they react to it. Because you have to have a process. And in these pure networked organizations with no bosses, the way ideas are developed and go forward is teams have to present to other teams and convince them. And that they have to earn money. Anybody can produce and build ideas, but people always have to earn funding in organizations. And this is more efficient, far more efficient than running things up and down a silo, by being hampered by unconscious biases of leaders. You eliminate that. And by the way, Blockbuster isn't here because of the unconscious bias of its CEO. Now, listeners may be surprised to learn Netflix early on offered to sell themselves to Blockbuster when they were $50 million in the hole, and to develop Blockbuster.com, its streaming service. And its CEO said, streaming will never impact my business. His unconscious bias killed the company. When you have teams making decisions, reporting to other teams, these unconscious biases get called out, they get worked, and it's more efficient and actually leads to better cost effectiveness, better quality, and more likely to be on time. This was our experience inside the Blues. When we put whatever network practices we could within this traditional context, once we got going, every system conversion, every product development, on time, under budget, high quality.
Now, Rod is such a smart guy. I really respect him. I've had the opportunity to work with him through a few workshops. If you haven't gotten his book, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, I would highly recommend it. It's really, really compelling reading if you want to learn more about his perspective on what he calls networked organizations. So thank you to Rod. Next, we're going to hear from my friend Doug Kirkpatrick. He's written many books on self-managed, what he calls self-management or self-managed groups. I mentioned his book, The No Limits Enterprise, and what we're going to hear his sort of how he discovered this idea of self-management in just a second. So I'll have him tell you, or we'll play a clip from telling you how he started. But the story essentially is about how, as one of the founders of the Morningstar Tomato Company, they were able to create this self-managed organization that to this day runs without bosses, without managers, which is mind-blowing, just mind-blowing. It's now the largest tomato manufacturer in the world. So we'll hear how he discovered this model in the early 90s and the 2 simple principles that are the foundation of this type of organization. I think this is really interesting because they're sort of a guiding light for how this works. It's really clarifying. And then in the second clip, we'll hear what he believes is the first thing someone inside an organization can do to move in this direction. If you are a manager, an individual contributor, I asked him about this because I find it really, really compelling.
Over 30 years ago, I was very fortunate to meet a young entrepreneur here in California named Chris Roofer, who was starting a high-tech food processing company. And just got out of college and looking for something to do. And so I joined his core team. And we started a little food processing company in Northern California here, processing tomatoes. And the company was fairly successful. I was the financial controller. Um, and we got up to about $100 million in sales. But we had defaulted to the traditional command and control management structure that has been prevalent since the 1840s. And so our founder, Chris, was at the top of the pyramid as a managing partner. And then we had a layer of managers, of which I was one. We had a production manager, marketing manager, et cetera. And then we had a layer of supervisors who conducted factory operations. And then we had a layer under the supervisors of coordinators to chunk down instructions to the working folks at the bottom of the pyramid who did all the real work. And so we muddled along, reasonably successful from a financial point of view, but a little bit frustrating from the standpoint of structure. And we just started noticing things as we went along. And one of the things we noticed is that when people came to work, they'd park their cars, go into the factory and start work. Every one of those people is already a manager in their own personal lives. So every one of those people is already making gigantic life-altering decisions on their own without a boss. They're deciding who to date, who to marry, what to do for a living, whether to buy a house, car, have children, or whatever. And somehow they do that without a boss. It's only when they enter the portal of the workplace, I guess they're incompetent to accomplish anything unless they subjected themselves to bosses. And so we collected these insights. And then in 1990, well, actually 1988, Chris left to start a new venture. And in 1990, February of 1990, I joined him. The new venture is called Morningstar. And so we were working out of a tiny little farmhouse on a dusty canal bank here in Northern California. And one day in March, Chris came into the farmhouse and said, I'd like to have a meeting of colleagues and talk about organization. And at the time, there were 24 of us. I was the only admin type. We had a core team of 24. We met with him at night in a double-wide construction trailer on the job site. We sat around in a circle and folding chairs. He handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. And we reviewed those and realized they really boiled down to two principles. The first principle is that people shouldn't use force or coercion against other human beings, which is foundational to all law everywhere in the world. Assault, battery, theft, and burglary, kidnapping, murder, and all the rest. The second principle was that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. If you say you're going to do something, you do it, which is foundational to civil law. Contract law would mean nothing but for that principle. And so we discussed, debated, had a dialogue for a couple hours. And at the end of the evening, we just kind of looked around the circle and realized, these principles are self-evident. We have no objections. They make perfect sense. And so we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And when we filed out of the trailer, we were a self-managed enterprise at that moment. Now, this was March of 1990. We still had a ton of work to do. We had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground for 300 miles up and down the state of California. We had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters out in the Atlantic Ocean waiting to go through the Panama Canal. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory and drive the trucks. And we had hundreds of construction workers on the job site 24/7, constructing and fabricating and pulling wire and all the rest. But finally, on July 16th of that year, 1990, we turned on the factory and we produced about 90 million pounds of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market. And we changed the cost structure of the entire industry pretty much overnight. And we did it without a single human boss. No bosses, no managers, no supervisors, no titles, zero command authority. And we created a product that I believe everyone by this time in North America and around the world has eaten, which is a product that goes into everything you can think of in the grocery store, from ketchup to salsa, pizza sauce, barbecue sauce, steak sauce, spaghetti sauce, and thousands of other products. And we expanded. We built another factory, then another factory. We expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers and remote warehouses, and toward the supply in terms of farming, transplanting, and harvesting and trucking. We did it without a single human boss, no bosses of others, no designated managers, no vice presidents, no titles, zero command authority. And now we're the largest tomato processor in the world, a billion-dollar company with thousands of colleagues. We don't call them employees at Morningstar. No command authority. Two simple principles: don't use force and keep commitment. So individual contributors in an organization, say a typical team member, should look for opportunities to approach work in a more pure networked, self-managed way. And so those could include things like, instead of having, formal behind the desk performance reviews with fellow colleagues, we just go out to lunch or dinner and talk about performance as a team. We adopt practices from other disciplines like agile teams, and we have stand-ups, and we have retros, and we engage in team-type behaviors that are more networked and more directly peer-to-peer. We just find ways to bring artifacts of self-management into the workplace and do things in as self-managed a way as possible. So that's what individual contributors can do. Leaders have lots of options. So if you're the leader of an organization and you have willpower and courage, and you want to make a move toward a transformed organization, then I would encourage leaders to think about organizing a retreat of some kind with the top leadership echelon of the organization, plus other influencers in the organization, and engage in some and invite them to engage in some open social technologies, open space, world cafes, authority circles, whatever it happens to be, and crowdsource some experiments and pilots that you can then launch, and have those leaders take responsibility for organizing those and measuring the results, reporting those back, and start iterating your way toward a more self-managed organization. So there are lots of options for leaders, and there are lots of ways for individual contributors as well to kind of inject more self-management practices into the ordinary work.
Joost Schouten is an entrepreneur and a passionate promoter of the idea of adaptive organizational models and distributed authority. And so the conversation I had with him, his episode was really fascinating because he's in the kind of the nitty gritty. He's building this platform to help organizations actually do the kind of transition to and actually do the kind of work that Rod and Doug were talking about. So he's really thinking through how these kind of the sort of self-management and distributed authority companies are better than traditional management structures. So we're going to start with his one segment on the crux of the problem of traditional management and why we need to change. And then the second piece is investigating, or I asked him to explain this term that he uses that is essential kind of to the thinking. His term what he says is role-based work. So the second clip explains what that is and the benefits of it.
And maybe I want to touch back a little bit about the managers and what they want and what their challenges are. I think that is a symptom of seeing the changes coming and trying to adapt to that, but using the tools of management hierarchy to fix it, right? So there's a paradigm shift that I think you would want to go through from a command and control. We can predict the future, and we're gonna control organization in that direction, right? So that's the conventional methodology, and there's many different ways to do it, but there's a command and control element to our conventional organizations to sense and respond, right? So how can we as an organization be really adaptive and responsive to our changing environment? And to do that well, you need to enable everyone within the organization to be a sensor. Wonderful thing, they already do that, but also a responder, and actually give people the tool and the possibility to respond and actually act upon that, rather than go through an approval process to get a change through, right? If I, within my role or within my roles, sense a change is coming and something needs to be changed, I should be able to change it, unless we have made explicit that that's harmful, and then we don't do that, or we need to integrate whatever perspectives. But those tools of making those changes should be available to everyone. If I see within my team a problem and I want to address it, and it needs to be a structural problem, I need to change the role of one of my peers so that I can depend on them better, I should be able to propose that change, and then we don't need a manager or anyone else to say, yes, that's all right or that's not all right. No, we know our reality best. Let's actually get our internal agreements sorted out amongst each other. Why should the rest of the organization care? We get better at delivering value doing that. So that's really a part of a key element of role-based work, of self-organization, so that shaping the roles of the organization with the entire organization. And that doesn't mean conventional management no longer have authority. They can use exactly those same tools, and they can actually do it quicker and faster because they're not burdened by having to do that for the entire organization, or burdened by delegation in detail all the time, because you empower the entire organization to act by themselves. What you in effect do, you make everyone a manager rather than eliminate the managers. Everyone. It is context, not the people. So, and who shapes that context? The organization. So if you find that people not taking initiative, what is happening? They carry anxiety coming into your organization, and you need to figure out where that anxiety is coming from and how to undo it, so that they can show up without anxiety, because anxiety is the creativity killer. And it's deep. It's not something that you just do over a course of a couple of months. I think this is a process of decades for us as a society to tackle and to figure out why we're also anxious in our work. But small changes go a long way already. And we also don't have to change our organizations completely overnight, right? There's lots of small experiments to start with. Within the confines of a team, you can have role-based work, as long as you set the parameters properly, as long as you don't come at it with, now we are fully freeing you to do whatever you want, and you can do, we're all going to Valhalla. But no, within the confines of this experiment, this is what we can do. And then you can actually see quite a lot of progress already, like the anecdote I just shared.
So you keep saying rule-based work. Tell me, what rules are we talking about?
Well, what I'm actually saying, and that might be my next, is role-based work.
Role-based work. Okay,
but
role-based work.
It's not far off from rule-based work, but there's a lot of association and negative association to rules, because it's often the pain of rules is they're imposed on you and you don't like that. Where if you can impact those rules and change them yourself, they're no longer rules, they're agreements, because you step into them. So, and that is kind of the essence of role-based work, is because what are roles other than agreement between a role filler and the organization? What can we expect from each other? the shift from management hierarchy, which does that as well, right? You get a function profile and there's an org chart. The problem is it's never used, it's outdated, and culture or implicit hierarchies really rule the day. So if you want people to thrive, you need to get rid of the anxiety that we show up with, which means you need to give people a pathway to impact the rules that apply to them. And roles is the most predominant form that these rules show up, right? What is expected of me, and what can I expect of my colleagues? And if I have a process to impact that, if I can change that agreement tomorrow because reality asks it, then all of a sudden I can impact my the rules that I am bound by, and I no longer have to be anxious because there's not something that I can't impact, and I can shape the reality that serves me and the organization. So let's not forget that, right? This is not by the people for the people. No, it is for the organizational purpose, right? We're here to do a job, and we're here to make an impact of sorts. So you need to, like all these systems that are out there, and there's many experiments being done. I would like to name a few. There's sociocracy, holacracy, teal practices. There's a bunch of them out there. They are all structured in such a way that you can make sure that whatever decisions are being made serve the organization. And that's explicit, right? So that's often a misconception by people when you talk about self-organization. Say, "Woohoo! I can now finally do whatever I want, and I'm gonna just sabotage the whole lot because they paid me for so long." No, you can't. Like, I'm sorry you feel sabotage. You feel the pain, and how can we serve you in that? But we're here to do a job, and let's make sure we do that well.
So you talked before about creating a new role for yourself or for others. So is that one of the ways that someone can sense and respond, like or change their own role, I suppose. But what is the trigger for creating a new role? Because you've mentioned it. It seems like it's an important part of the concept that you're moving forward with, because you've said it a few times. So talk to me about what is the impetus for when as a participant, when would I create a new role?
Whenever you feel there's one needed. It's as simple as that, right? So and roles are smaller because in today's world, when we talk about roles, we often equate them with functions. Like, I fill one role. Now, I think one of the massive benefits of this paradigm shift is, no, you have a portfolio of roles. You already do that today, by the way. You just haven't made it explicit. It's really wonderful to move from the process. Hey, let's do a role mapping exercise with our team or organization and realize you've got 20 roles. And then I personally, in my own software, I label my roles with enriching and draining, right? So I have a portfolio of about 15 roles in my organization, and about 5 are enriching, 5 are draining, and a bunch of others I have neutral. I don't really care so much for. I want to get rid of those that I find draining because they're not serving me. And I want to really focus on the ones that are enriching for me. Like, and sometimes I realize, hey, I actually do work. Whenever work needs to be done, I pick it up. But let's make sure we are explicit about that, both towards the organization and myself, that is value that I'm bringing. So if you find yourself doing something that has not been made explicit to the organization, that's a good reason to say, hey, I need to create a new role. And that can be very small. It can be, hey, every month I send a newsletter and it's not captured anywhere. If I go on a holiday or a sabbatical or a leave next year, the organization needs to know about this important work that I'm doing. So let's make sure we put that into a role, newsletter role, one accountability, monthly newsletter sent out. Wonderful. That's it. It can be that small. And then if no one sees harm with it, and that's also a difference, right? If no one within your team that sees harm in that proposal, it's just going to be accepted. If there is harm for that new role, then we integrate that and figure out how to navigate that. And there's different ways of doing that, probably beyond the scope of this podcast today.
Everybody has to do things that are probably draining
Yeah.
in what they do. Uh, uh, but you kind of have to do them, or is that an assumption that I've just made over the decades, like you've said? Like, what does it mean to um, have to want to get rid of a detracting, a draining role inside of at your organization? Like what, or in your capacity? Is it, do you have to go pawn it off on somebody, convince someone else that it needs to get done? How does that work?
Um, Not specified, not quite sure. The fact that I still have them means I'm well aware that it needs to be done. It just, the wonderful thing is that we need, if that takes too long, it means we need to attract other people, because obviously no one else in the organization finds them enriching. Um, Perhaps we need to find somebody that is that has the core competencies that does really like that role, so that I can hand them over.
Hmm.
There's also like a fun. So we use holacracy within our organization, and there is anyone at any time can drop a role, right? I can just drop those draining roles, but we also have a process by which I fill another role that makes me immediately accountable for any role that doesn't have a role filler. So me dropping that role doesn't really make a big change. So and that's a
Okay.
wonderful incentive for me
Yeah.
to ensure that we hire new people to fill those roles, right? If
Yeah.
I don't want to be doing that work.
Yeah.
So and in that you see that these systems are set up to serve the organizational purpose, not necessarily this idea of kumbaya, it's all for the people. No, those rules are there. They're annoying for me. It means I need to do work sometimes that I don't like. But
Right.
that's wonderful because we're here to do a job, but to serve a purpose. Um,
How is this the same or different than another concept that I've brought up a couple times that I think has a lot of value, which is team level agreements. I mean, is that team level agreements is kind of let's see, if I were to real time kind of place it in the context of this conversation, it's a sort of a microcosm of what we're discussing, where you're like, hey, we're getting together to do this project. Here's how we're going to do it. Here, usually it's about communication and approval, right? Or conflict.
yeah.
Is that, are we in the same universe? Is that something that, yeah, that's I'm sort of interpreting it correctly?
Yep. So it's just another agreement that we agree upon together, right? I think there might be differences in how decisions are made, right? How do you decide on that? Is that, do we all have to agree? Do we find a consensus, a consent? Do we compromise? Like, so there's many ways to get to that, and I think self-organization and specifically the flavors that have been around for a couple of decades or a decade have some really elegant, good answers as to, okay, how do you deal with the fact that people don't always agree? Because agreeing is a terrible way to make a collective decision, especially if your organization gets a bit bigger.
Yep.
So there's consent where you say, no, you need to show objective harm to stop any organization or any decision. All right, so that's a wonderful way to stimulate innovation. It means that anyone can pretty much move forward unless somebody can show objective harm. We're going to try it and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to do that really transparently, so we can instantly step in if we see that any harm arises out of whatever we decided.
So it's almost, it sounds to me like it's the antithesis of the way organizations run now. Organizations run now defer to the status quo. And you have to make a case and you have to really be able to say this, we have to experiment with it, and then we can say it's okay to go, and then maybe even that gets canceled. Whereas the way that you're describing how you've created this or imagine or advise is, hey, the assumption is you can make a change, you can do a thing, unless someone says they've demonstrated that you can't,
Yeah.
which I really like, because we've for over probably for 2 decades now, everybody's been really like consumed with innovation. And it's
Yeah.
such a mystery why big organizations can't get it right. Well, it's just
I
because
don't.
They
Yeah.
define their role. That's what they're trying to do is essentially, it's the way the organism works is I don't want anything to change.
No. Well, and I think that is a symptom of the same anxiety that I talked about earlier, right? So if
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
I best not make a mistake. Um, so good luck innovating that. Like there's a reason why big organizations try to emulate startup incubators and isolate them from the entire organization because they realize we can't do it. It's a bit baffling to me that they don't fix the systemic causes of that. But good on them for that innovation to try something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isolate. Let's look at our authority structures and start to innovate around how we make collective decisions. So we can drop some of that anxiety and innovate and learn and just accept the fact that we're going to make mistakes, but that's fuel for improving tomorrow rather than something to be avoided today.
What is one change that someone inside of an organization, a team leader, can make today that might help move them towards a role-based organization or self-directed organization?
Yeah. Well, and that's a nice link back to the software part. It is to map your the roles in your team, and there's some really simple mapping exercises, and I'm happy to share some resources around that.
That
where
sounds
you
good.
can
We'll put them in the show notes.
Nice. So what is the entire portfolio of roles in an organization? And that is more than the number of people in your organization. Usually most people have 2, 3, sometimes 5 or 15 roles. And if you look at that entire map and then you place that onto people, that is a wonderful aha moment. And place that onto people means what they are doing today, right? Not necessarily what you want them to do. That's a wonderful aha moment for people to realize, oh, that's what I do. Shit, that's actually quite a lot. How wonderful. How much value am I bringing? But also, hey, I want to get rid of that, or I need some help with that. And then in feedback rounds, that gets hugely beneficial as well, because when we do feedback on the person. And then you kind of you compromise across all their roles in one go and say, oh, you're doing pretty well. Or actually, you might be seeing somebody that is awesome in their developer role, but they kind of suck in their, I don't know, marketing part that they're doing. And then to really separate that out and to give feedback on a role by role basis, you can really start to get clarity on where they're thriving and where they need support of what they probably shouldn't be doing at all because they might not like it. But you can only get that clarity if you separate out the different values that somebody brings in that role mapping exercise. So there's within the context of a conventional organization, without tackling I don't know, incentive structures and ownership structures, which is really, really hard and probably a couple of decades down the road. Within a team, that role mapping exercise gets really useful. And then especially if keep doing that, keep using that within your team and actually realize when you're doing work, from which role am I doing this? And can this be expected of me? Or if a colleague comes up to you, say, hey, can you pick this up? Say, well, from which role are you asking that to? What role? Like that feels a bit unnatural, but it's really useful because it allows you to create focus based on your shared agreements. Say, oh, well, that's not quite expected of me. I'm not going to prioritize that right now because the opportunity cost is that I won't be developing. And I want to be really good at what is expected of me and really deliver on what you guys can expect of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a no to you, but go to Joe. Joe seems to fill a role, something around marketing. Let's, so you actually have that a living org chart that you can use today, and it doesn't take so much. It will plant the seeds of thinking about your shared agreements differently, and also give people the tools to create focus and help them prioritize what is actually expected of them.
I hope that these little clips, putting these together, were as insightful for you as they were or as they are for me. I really think we have this opportunity to change how companies are being run. And I know it's not an easy lift. And one of the things Doug said that, we talked about, um, how it's very aspirational, these ideals, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try for them. And so I would encourage you to do some experimentation around what it means to maybe provide more authority to your colleagues. Is there a way to start to transition into a little more self-management, and think about removing some of that or offloading some of that overhead, some of that management overhead, to software, to processes and systems, in a way that is beneficial, allowing your employees to get more time back, and to be able to not just get more time back, but provide more value, to be able to do more of their own work, what they think is where they are sort of the most productive, and they're able to contribute the most of their, what their skills allow and how they see it. I think this is going to be obviously a generational journey, but I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to get to this, at least get to some companies are able to transition to this idea of distributed leadership, networked organization, self-management, distributed authority. These are all really, really interesting ideas that have been out in the world for a little bit, but we have this opportunity to really make a big change. And so I'd encourage you to think deeply about it. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening to Great